The first time my daughter asked me not to come to dinner, she did it with a smile so careful it looked rehearsed. We were standing in my shop on Superior Street in Duluth, Minnesota, a little after 5:40 on a Thursday evening. March 14th, I remember, because the snow outside had turned gray at the curbs, that ugly end of winter color. And because I had just finished replacing the crystal on a 1976 Seiko Bellmatic for a retired tugboat captain named Earl. Earl paid me in cash, $20 bills, folded twice the way older men still do when they don't trust card readers. My daughter, Claire, stood near the front counter with her camel coat buttoned all the way up and her leather gloves still on. She looked expensive, not rich exactly, but polished in that clean catalog kind of way. Cream scarf, small gold earrings, hair tucked behind one ear like she had practiced being photographed from that angle. I was holding my loop in my left hand and my Hamilton Cocky Field in my right. By the Hamilton was my wife's gift to me in 1983, back when $40 felt like a commitment, and dinner at Red Lobster was what we called fancy. The glass still had a scratch near the number 4 from the day I dropped it against the sink while holding Claire as a newborn. I never replaced that crystal. Some damage earns the right to stay. Claire kept looking at the watch instead of my face. Dad, she said, I need to talk to you about Saturday. Here's the thing about your children. You know their voices before they know their own. By the difference between tired and nervous, when they are asking a question and when they are delivering something already decided. I set the Hamilton down on the felt mat straight, parallel to the edge. I do that when I'm trying not to react. I line things up, receipts, screwdrivers, paper clips, bad news. Right angles make more sense than people. What about Saturday? I asked. She breathed in through her nose, not deeply, just enough to buy half a second. Everett's parents are hosting dinner at the club, the Northland Club. She nodded. It's not really a big thing, which meant it was a big thing. And in their very traditional, I almost smiled. Almost, I will not be taking questions about that. Traditional how? She looked past me toward the wall where I kept old watches in shallow wooden drawers. They just have expectations of dinner guests, of family. That was the first red flag. Not the words themselves, the way she said family, like it was a room I had not been invited into yet. I waited. I have made a living waiting. You cannot rush a balance wheel. You cannot bully numbers into telling the truth. People, in my experience, are not much different. Claire took one step closer to the counter. Her glove creaked when she tightened her hand. I think it would be better if you didn't come this time. Nobody said anything for a while. Outside, a city bus hissed at the curb. The radiator behind my workbench clicked twice somewhere in the back room. The old wall clock with the cracked walnut case gave one tired little tick like it wanted no part of this conversation. I said, better for who? She blinked. Dad, better for who, Claire? Her mouth opened, then closed. Her jaw did this small side movement she inherited from her mother. And for 1 second, I saw her at 9 years old, standing in our kitchen, trying to confess she had broken the blue mixing bowl. Then she found the version of herself she had brought with her. Evan's family doesn't know you run a clock repair shop. I don't run a clock repair shop. I repair watches. That's not the point. It usually is. She sighed. There are people who notice things. Most people do. They'll ask questions about what, about you, about your work, about where you live, about where you live, about where you live, about mom, about why you still drive that old truck. My truck was a 1998 Ford Ranger, dark green with a dent above the rear wheel and a passenger side window that needed help in cold weather. It started every morning. It never lied to me. That put it ahead of several people I knew. I looked at her coat again, at the scarf, at the little gold earrings. And what answer embarrasses you most? I asked. Her face changed just a little. I didn't say I was embarrassed. No, I said, you drove across town in rush hour traffic to imply it in person. That's different. She looked down. I should tell you something before I go any further. I loved my daughter, not in the easy greeting card way people say it, when no one has tested them. I loved her through ear infections, algebra, her first heartbreak, 2 years of law school she decided not to finish, and the morning her mother died when Claire sat on the bathroom floor and kept saying, "I don't know what to do with my hands." I knew what she had lost. I knew what I had failed to say afterward. Grief made quiet people quieter, and I was already built like a locked drawer. So when she stood in my shop and asked me to disappear from a dinner because I did not match the room she wanted to enter, I did not get angry. I went very, very quiet. "Does Evan know you're asking me this?" I said. Her eyes flicked up. There it was. "Claire, he thinks it might be simpler." Simple. That's the word he used. "Of course it is." She swallowed. That's the word he used. "Of course it is." She swallowed. His parents are doing a lot for the wedding. They're paying. They offered. How much? Gad, don't. How much? She looked toward the window like someone might rescue her from basic math. Around $85,000. $85,000. $85,000. 85 for 12. I think there are moments when a number enters a room and everyone pretends it has not taken a chair. 85,412 sat right there between us wearing a clean suit and smiling. I lean back on my stool. That's very specific. Mrs. Whitcomb is organized. Mrs. Whitcomb, Evan's mother. I had met Evan Whitcomb 3 times. He shook hands like he had read about humility, but never practiced it. 34 years old, real estate development, navy blazer in summer. Said, "Sir, too often men like that use manners the way some people use cologne, too much and usually to cover something." "And what does Mrs. Whitcomb think I do?" I asked. Claire hesitated again. "Claire, she thinks you're retired." "I am not retired, I know, and she thinks you had some trouble after Mom died." I laughed. Not loudly, not bitterly. Just one short breath through my nose. You know what I did? I laughed because sometimes the insult is so neatly racked you have to admire the ribbon. "Trouble," I said. I didn't say that. "But you allowed it." Her hand froze on the counter. That one landed. I could see it, not because she cried or shouted. Claire never did either when something was true. Her eyes just stopped moving. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. Now, before you decide, this is a story about a poor old father being underestimated. Let me save you some time. I was not poor. I was not flashy either. Those are not the same thing, though. People who chase money often confuse them. I own the building my shop sat in, the duplex behind it, and 31% of a private forensic accounting firm in Minneapolis that still used my methods, my templates, and on difficult cases, my name when they needed doors opened. I had spent 28 years tracing money through divorce fraud, insurance schemes, family trusts, shell vendors, fake invoices, and the kind of clean looking theft that wears cufflinks. Then my wife, Mara, got sick. I came home. I fixed watches because watches tell the truth in a language I understand. They either keep time or they don't. No speeches, no perfume, no family dinner at the club. Claire knew pieces of this. She knew I had worked in accounting. She knew there had been clients. She knew her mother used to joke that I could find missing money in a snowstorm with one glove and a gas station receipt. But children don't always understand the size of their parents' lives before they became parents. To them, you begin when they begin. Everything before that is fog, and maybe I had let the fog sit too long. Claire took off one glove, then put it back on again. I just need Saturday to go well, and I would make it go poorly. I didn't say that. You keep not saying things very clearly. She looked at me then, and for the first time that night, I saw fear underneath the polish. "I love him," she said. I believed her. That made it worse. "Do you?" I asked. Her chin lifted. "Yes, And does loving him require editing your father out of the photograph? Her eyes shined, but she held herself together. It's one dinner, no, I said. It never is. The bell over the front door rang before she could answer. Naomi Price came in carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and a white bakery bag tucked under her arm. Naomi had been my friend for 31 years, which meant she had earned the right to enter my shop without knocking and insult my lighting before saying hello. She was 64, an estate attorney, 5'2" on a generous day, and built emotionally like reinforced concrete. We met in 1993 outside a courthouse in St. Paul after a trust dispute where both families lied badly and the judge looked personally offended by the paperwork. Noe and I ate cold turkey sandwiches in the parking lot afterward because neither of us had enough cash for the diner. She still claimed I owed her half a pickle. She was probably right. She stopped 3 steps inside and looked from Claire to me. Oh, Naomi said, "This feels expensive." Claire straightened. "Hi, Naomi. You look like you're about to ask your father to pretend he was raised by wolves." "Naomi," I said quietly, what I'm guessing. I'm also usually right. Claire's face tightened. "This is private." Naomi looked at me. I gave her nothing. She looked back at Claire and softened just enough. "Then I'll pretend to browse," she said, and walked Then I'll pretend to browse, she said, and walked 3 feet to the display case of watch straps, where she stood with the posture of a woman absolutely not pretending anything. Claire lowered her voice. "Can we not do this? We're already doing it," I said. She pulled her purse strap higher on her shoulder. "I came here because I didn't want you blindsided." That sentence interested me. Blindsided by what? She pressed her lips together. There are pauses that mean someone is choosing honesty. There are other pauses that mean they are deciding how much of the lie is still usable. Claire's was the second kind. "Evan's parents may have someone do a background," she said. Naomi turned around immediately. "I did not move a background check," she said. "It's not personal." I looked at my daughter for a long second. "Claire, I want you to think about that sentence until it embarrasses you." She closed her eyes. Naomi walked back to the counter slowly. "Who ordered it?" "I don't know if they ordered anything yet, but they discussed it." Claire said nothing. Naomi's face did not change, which was how I knew she was angry. Real anger in professionals does not look loud. It looks clean. I picked up my Hamilton and fastened it around my wrist. The scratched crystal caught the overhead light. "What company?" I asked. Claire shook her head. "Dad, please don't." "What company?" "I don't know. You do." Her breathing changed. "Whitcomb uses private firms for business all the time," she said. "Evan mentioned one Lake Bridge Risk." Naomi looked at me. "Just once. That was all." Lake Bridge Risk Advisory had 3 offices, 200 employees, and a polished website full of words like discretion and legacy protection. It also had a quiet division that subcontracted complex financial histories to a forensic accounting firm in Minneapolis. My firm, not publicly, not obviously, but cleanly, legally, and through contracts I had written myself. Something in my stomach shifted, not with fear exactly, but recognition, like hearing a floorboard creak in a house you built. Claire kept talking because silence makes guilty people generous. They just want to make sure there are no surprises before the wedding. And am I the surprise? She did not answer. I nodded once quietly. Then I said, "Tell Evan's parents they can investigate me." Claire's eyes snapped up. "What?" I said, "They can investigate me." Naomi set her coffee down very slowly. "Russell," she said. I held up one hand, just one. Claire stared at me like she had expected shame and found a locked door instead. "You're serious?" she asked. "I am. But Saturday, I won't come Saturday." Relief moved across her face so quickly, it hurt more than the request had. "I saw it. She knew I saw it. Neither of us named it." "But you're going to let them run the check?" she asked. "Yes." "Why?" I looked at the scratch near the 4 on my watch, the one Mara used to tease me about. She always said I kept it because I was sentimental and stubborn, and a man should be allowed at least 2 hobbies. because I said people should be careful what they asked to see. Saturday arrived cold enough to make the lake look metallic. I spent most of the morning rebuilding the mainspring assembly on a 1968 Omega Seamaster while snow hissed softly against the shop windows. Duluth has a certain kind of winter silence, not peaceful, exactly, heavy. Like the whole city is holding its breath beneath layers of ice and old money. At 11:12 a.m., Naomi called. "You're working," she said immediately. "You can hear that? I can hear tiny screwdrivers through the phone now. I've known you too long." I smiled despite myself. "That's medically concerning. You know what else is concerning? You know what else is concerning? The fact your daughter delivered a threat disguised as etiquette and you responded like a man ordering soup. It wasn't a threat. It was adjacent to one." I rotated the watch movement beneath the lamp. "Background checks don't scare me, no," Naomi said. "But daughters do." That sat there for a second. The thing about old friends is they know exactly where the floorboards creak. "You going to the dinner anyway?" she asked. "No, you should." She asked me not to. She implied it. "She's still my daughter." Naomi made a sound into the phone. Half sigh, half courtroom objection. "Russell, listen carefully. Families like the Whitcombs do not investigate people because they are cautious. They investigate because they believe information is ownership, probably. And trust me, rich people become very strange when they realize they can't categorize someone." I leaned back in my chair. The old leather groaned under me. "You represented rich people for 30 years. Exactly. I'm qualified." Outside, a snowplow dragged sparks down Superior Street. Naomi lowered her voice slightly. "Did Claire tell you which Whitcomb was pushing this?" She implied the mother. "Mothers usually manage appearances. Fathers manage exposure. Different skill sets. You sound impressed." "I'm observant." There was a pause. Then she said, "Did you call Minneapolis yet?" "No, you should. I know you avoiding it. I know you want me to." I turned the Omega crown slowly between my fingers, tiny precise clicks. Mechanical honesty. I trusted that sound more than most conversations. I trusted that sound more than most. "No," I said, finally, "I'll do it." After we hung up, I sat there for a while, not dramatically, no staring into the middle distance. I just sat in my shop with the radiator ticking behind me and the smell of machine oil in the air. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about being underestimated. Sometimes it feels good. There is a strange freedom in people assuming you are smaller than you are. You hear things, you see things, doors stay open around you because nobody thinks you own the building. But when your own child starts participating in that illusion, something in your chest does a thing it had never done before. At 12:03 p.m., I called Minneapolis. The number still lived in my muscle memory after 7 years. Second ring, Brenner Analytics. Claire Brenner still there. A pause, then laughter. "Well, hell," Russell Marlowe decided telephones still exist. That was Daniel Claire Brenner, founder of Brenner Analytics, 68 years old, suspenders every day since the Clinton administration, and one of the smartest forensic auditors I had ever met. We called him Claire because his mother lost a bet in 1857 and refused to apologize for it. "You sound alive." I said, "Spite keeps me youthful. You know that?" I said, "Spite keeps me youthful. You know that? I need information." "Of course you do." "Lake Bridge risk." Silence. "Not long, just enough." Then Daniel said, "Interesting. You subcontracted recently." 3 days ago. "What case?" Another pause. "You want the official answer or the answer that saves us both 20 minutes? The useful one?" I figured. Paper shuffled on his end. Keyboard clicks. "They requested a discrete premarital financial and reputational assessment, reacuditausal assessment regarding one Russell, Edwy, Duluth, Minnesota." I closed my eyes once. "Who authorized it?" "Whitcomb Holdings family office." There it was. "Not the son." "Not Claire, the father." Daniel continued. "Request flagged automatically because your name still sits inside restricted archives." Who's handling intake? Junior team at first, then Alicia froze it. That made sense. Alicia Moreno trained under me 12 years ago. Brilliant with shell company patterns, terrible at poker. Once caught a $7 million vendor fraud because a fake landscaping company accidentally used the wrong tax font. Did they see anything? I asked. Daniel laughed softly. Russell, what? You know exactly what they saw. I did. Restricted access, legacy partner designation, escalation lock, which meant somewhere inside Lakebridge Risk, probably in a glass conference room with expensive water bottles and fake comms. Somebody was discovering the retired watch repairman had deeper financial protections than half their executive clients. Did Whitcomb push further? I asked. Yes. How far? They requested expanded exposure mapping. Now that interested me. Exposure mapping means they weren't merely checking criminal history or debt. They were tracing assets, influence, liabilities, litigation, vulnerability, business associations. You do not pay for exposure mapping unless you believe somebody might become a problem, or unless you already plan to treat them like one. I stood and walked toward the front window. Snow curled around the parked cars outside like cigarette smoke. What exactly are they afraid of? I asked quietly. Daniel exhaled through his nose. That's the fascinating part. I waited. They're not looking for poverty. No, they're looking for hidden leverage. That sentence settled heavily because smart people understand something average people don't. Poor men are manageable. Quiet men are dangerous. I mean that literally. Daniel, yeah, send me everything they requested legally. Can. You absolutely can. That's fair. Paper shuffled again. That's fair. Paper shuffled again. You still using the old Proton Mail account? Unfortunately, I'll sanitize what I can. Good. Another pause. Then his voice changed slightly. You okay? People ask that question casually most of the time. Daniel never did. I looked at my reflection in the shop glass. Gray at the temples now, tie slightly crooked. Mara used to fix that without asking. My daughter thinks I embarrass her. I said Daniel was quiet. Then children confuse simplicity with weakness sometimes. That an accounting principle. No, he said, that one cost me 2 marriages. I almost smiled. Almost. We hung up at 12:19. At 12:31, Claire texted me, thank you for understanding about tonight. Not sorry, not I love you, understanding. I stared at the message for a while longer than I should have. Then I placed the phone face down beside the register and went back to work. At 4:42 p.m., Naomi arrived, carrying Chinese takeout and enough judgment to power a small city. You've eaten nothing today? She announced. You don't know that. I know your face. Same one you had in 2008 during the Halverson fraud case. That man forged invoices through a church roofing charity, and you found it because the commas were inconsistent. They were. Now Naomi unpacked containers onto the counter. Sesame chicken, rice, dumplings. You know, she said normal people drink during emotional crises. I had coffee. That explains the terrifying calm. I handed her chopsticks. She studied me for a second. I handed her chopsticks. You heard back from Minneapolis? Yes. And the Whitcombs escalated to exposure mapping. Naomi stopped mid-reach. Oh, yeah, that's aggressive. Them wet means, it means they think I'm hiding something, aren't you? Several things. Mostly receipts. Naomi pointed a dumpling at me. You joke when you're angry. I joke when other people are predictable. She leaned back against the counter. You know what bothers me most? She asked. The classism? No, that's boring. Wealthy people have been mistaking polish for character since Rome. Then what? That Claire didn't warn them off. I didn't answer immediately because that one hurt. Not loudly, quietly, the dangerous kind. The kind that arrives after midnight and sits at the edge of your bed, asking careful questions. Naomi softened a little. Russell, she thinks she's building a future, and people building future sometimes convince themselves collateral damage is temporary. That sounded practiced. I was married once too, Naomi snorted. twice. Second one barely counts. She married your boat mechanic. He had kind eyes. You married him for discounted engine labor. Partially, that broke the tension just enough. A little humor matters in ugly conversations. Otherwise, bitterness spreads everywhere like black mold. At 6:08 p.m., while the Whitcombs were probably sipping wine beneath chandelier lighting at the Northland Club, my email chimmed encrypted message. A movie by From Daniel. I opened it slowly. Attached were the sanitized request files from Lakebridge Risk, engagement summary, client objectives, preliminary assessment notes. I read all 14 pages. Standing up by page 4, something in my stomach shifted. By page 8, I set the papers down very carefully. By page 11, Naomi stopped eating entirely. What she asked, I didn't answer. I kept reading. There are moments when your professional instincts wake up before your emotions do. Mine had spent nearly 3 decades tracing lies through financial documents, and right there in front of me, hidden beneath polished language and consultant phrasing, I saw something deeply familiar. Not caution, not curiosity, containment. The Whitcombs were not merely evaluating me. They were trying to determine whether I could threaten a pending acquisition. Naomi read over my shoulder. Then she whispered, "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." Whitcomb Holdings was preparing to acquire 42 acres of commercial shoreline property outside Duluth Harbor through layered holding companies. I knew the parcel immediately. Everybody in regional development knew it. And 3 years earlier, I had quietly purchased a minority environmental review position connected to that exact land through a conservation trust. Moore helped establish before she died. I hadn't thought about it in months. Think about that for a second. The Whitcombs weren't afraid Claire's father was poor. They were afraid Claire's father might accidentally have authority over a 9-figure deal. I sat down slowly. Naomi looked between me and the papers. They don't know. She said no. They genuinely don't know. I laughed again. This time Naomi did too. Not because it was funny exactly. By more because reality occasionally becomes so absurd, your brain protects itself with humor. You know what the beautiful part is, Naomi asked. What, they investigated you so aggressively they almost exposed themselves first. That was true, very true. I turned another page. There, buried beneath internal notes, sat a sentence highlighted in yellow. Subject: APR's low risk personally, but his historical buzziness affiliations require discreet monitoring prior to merger finalization, not wedding. Business, Claire had no idea. I would bet my truck on that. She thought this was social embarrassment, family image, country club nonsense. Family image, country club nonsense. Meanwhile, somewhere behind the curtains, the Whitcombs were evaluating whether allowing their son to marry my daughter might complicate a land acquisition worth approximately $214 million. The silence in my shop suddenly felt different, sharper, like a room after lightning. Naomi folded her arms. Russell, yeah. You realize this changes everything. I looked again at Mara's scratched Hamilton on my wrist, ticking steadily. Truthfully, no, I said quietly. It explains everything. At 7:14 p.m., my phone rang. Claire, I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, I said. Her voice sounded strained, tight around the edges. Dad, you all right? A pause. Then, how well do you know the Whitcombs? That got my attention. Well enough, I said carefully. Why? Another pause. I could hear restaurant noise behind her. Glassware, soft piano, Wealth trying very hard to sound relaxed. Then Claire whispered something that made Naomi slowly lower her coffee cup because Evan's father just asked how long you've been connected to North Shore Environmental Review. Nobody said anything for a moment. I leaned back in my chair very slowly, and somewhere deep in the building, the old cracked walnut clock began striking 7 with tired little metallic echoes that sounded, to me at least, almost like laughter. Dad, Claire's voice came thinner this time, less polished, like somebody had pulled one loose thread and the rest of the fabric was considering its options. I'm here, I said. How do you know North Shore Environmental Review? Naomi watched me from across the counter without moving. She had practiced law long enough to recognize the moment a room changes ownership. I stood up and walked toward the back office, not because I was hiding, because some conversations deserve walls. The old floorboards creaked beneath my shoes. My office still smelled faintly like cedar and machine oil, same as it had 7 years ago when Mara used to sit in the corner chair grading middle school essays while I worked invoices at night. I closed the door halfway. Claire, I said, who asked you that question? Evan's father, directly. Yes. At dinner? Yes. Interesting. Men like Richard Whitcomb did not ask direct questions publicly unless they were unsettled. What exactly did he say? Claire inhaled shakily. He asked if you had ever mentioned environmental review work. I told him no, because you repair watches. And he looked at me for a really long time. I sat down slowly. And then he asked how much I actually knew about your finances. Naomi mouthed one silent word from the doorway. Jesus, I nodded once. Claire continued before I could answer. Dad, what is happening? There it was. Fear. Real fear this time. Not embarrassment, not social anxiety. Fear is quieter, more human. It strips polish right off people. I looked at the framed photograph beside my desk. Mara on Brighton Beach in October 2004, holding her boots in one hand because she hated getting sand inside the car, wind pushing her hair across her face, laughing at me for insisting on carrying a cooler nobody had asked for. She used to say, Russell, you prepare for weekends like we were evacuating a nation. I missed her suddenly so hard it felt physical. Dad, I'm thinking. Well, stop thinking and tell me what's going on. Now that sounded like my daughter, not the careful version from the shop, the real one underneath. I need you to answer something honestly. I said, okay, did Evan know his family was investigating me before you came to my shop? Silence, not long enough. Yes. I closed my eyes once, something in my chest settled instead of breaking. Funny how that works sometimes. Something in my chest settled instead of breaking. The truth arrives and suddenly the confusion stops moving around. Did he agree with it? He said it was normal. For who? For families with exposure. There was that word again, exposure. I almost smiled, almost. Claire, I said gently, what do you think his family actually does? They develop commercial property. That's the brochure answer. Dad, no, think about it. Really think. Families like that don't spend $20,000 on investigative reviews because they're worried a watch repairman might embarrass them at dinner. Her breathing slowed. I could practically hear the gears turning. Then quietly, how much money do you have? Naomi looked down immediately to hide her reaction, because here's the thing. The amount wasn't the point, never was, but the question still hurt. Not because she asked, because she had never wondered before tonight. That's what you want to know, I said. No, I mean, I don't know what I'm asking anymore. That's honest at least, Dad, please. I leaned back in my chair. You remember the summer your mother got sick? Yes. You remember I stopped traveling? Yes. I sold my equity position publicly, or that's what people thought. Another silence. Then you didn't know? No, walked quietly into the office and shut the door the rest of the way. Outside, the radiator clicked twice. Claire whispered, what are you saying? I'm saying appearances are useful sometimes. How much of the company do you own? Enough. Dad, 31%, absolute silence. Even the restaurant noise behind her seemed to disappear. Then I heard her say very faintly away from the phone, oh my God, not to me, to herself. You told people you retired, she said finally. I told people I came home. That's not the same thing, no, I said. It isn't. Naomi leaned against the filing cabinet, arms folded. Claire spoke again, slower now. Evan's father said your name triggered some kind of escalation review inside Lakebridge. That would happen. Why? Because they subcontract certain financial investigations to your company. Yes. She stopped breathing for about 2 full seconds. Then came one short laugh, sharp and disbelieving. You're kidding. I am not. You are telling me the company investigating you works for you, partially, Dad. That's the structure, yes. Another laugh. This one closer to panic. You knew this not until today, and you didn't tell me. You asked me not to attend dinner because my truck embarrassed you. That landed hard. Nobody spoke. I could hear silverware clinking faintly in the distance behind her. Expensive restaurant noise. The soundtrack of people pretending control is the same thing as stability. Finally, she whispered, I didn't know. No, I said quietly, you didn't. There's an old rule in forensic accounting. Most fraud survives because people only investigate what they expect to find. That applies to families too. Claire expected weakness, simplicity, a small life folded neatly into a small shop. So she never looked deeper. I rubbed my thumb across the scratched crystal of my Hamilton. You still there? She asked. Yes. What do I do? That question mattered because she did not ask, what do we do? She asked what she should do. Meaning she already felt alone in that room. First, I said calmly, you stop panicking. I'm not panicking. You're whispering in a restaurant bathroom a beat. How did you know I left the table? You always needed privacy to think, even as a kid. Remember the linen closet? And just like that, unexpectedly, she laughed. Tiny, fragile, real. At age 11, Claire used to sit inside the upstairs linen closet with a flashlight. Whenever school overwhelmed her, Mara would find her there reading horse magazines beside folded towels like a tiny, anxious raccoon. I forgot about that, she murmured. I didn't. The silence softened slightly after that, not healed, just softer. Dad, she said carefully, is Evan's family in trouble? Now we were finally asking the correct question. I don't know yet, but you think something's wrong. I think wealthy people don't spend this much energy controlling information unless information matters. Nary controlling information matters. Nario nodded once from across the room. Claire lowered her voice again. What kind of trouble? Could be nothing. That doesn't sound convincing. It isn't. I stood and walked toward the office window, snow still falling over Superior Street. Thin now, almost delicate. Claire, yeah, I need you to listen carefully. Okay, if anybody asks about my business relationships, investments, or legal affiliations, you say you don't know, but now I do know. No, I said. You know almost nothing. Naomi almost smiled at that. Claire exhaled shakily. This is insane. Yes. Should I leave now? That was the real question. I considered it seriously. Are you safe? What, Claire? Are you safe? Pause. Then quieter. Yes. Has anyone threatened you? No. Has Evan? No. I believed her immediately, whatever this was. It wasn't that kind of story. You don't need to leave dinner dramatically. I said, just listen more than you speak. You sound like you're preparing for court. I spent 28 years preparing for court. I spent 28 years preparing for court. You know what I mean? I did. And here's the thing. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the Northland Club, walk into that polished dining room, and watch Richard Whitcomb's face collapse in real time. I knew exactly how to do it too. Quietly, no shouting, just facts placed carefully on the table, one at a time like loaded chess pieces. But anger is fast. Cleverness is fast. What I do is slow, always slow. Dad, I'm here. What happens now? I looked at Naomi. She answered before I could. Now, she said loudly enough for Claire to hear. The people who thought they were hunting discover they walked into somebody else's woods. Claire went silent. Naomi's there, she asked. She brought dumplings. Are they the pork ones? Naomi grabbed the phone from my hand before I could stop her. They were the pork ones, she said. Russell Stress ate half of them while pretending to be emotionally unavailable. I did not. You absolutely did. And for one strange little second, Claire laughed again. Then a man's voice appeared faintly in the background. Claire, Evan. Even through the muffled distance, I could hear tension in him, tight jaw, controlled tone, the sound of somebody discovering his father had not told him everything. I have to go, Claire whispered. Dad, yes, I really didn't know. I closed my eyes briefly. I know, and I did. That was the worst part. We hung up at 7:42 p.m. The room stayed quiet afterward. Naomi handed my phone back slowly. You believe her? Yes. You sure? Yes. She studied me carefully. That makes this harder. It does. Naomi sat down across from me. You want my professional opinion? Not particularly. Too bad. I almost smiled. She leaned forward. The Whitcombs made a mistake tonight. One specific mistake. She tacked the printed report on my desk. They assumed information flows upward through money, and everybody eventually answers to wealth. And they just discovered you don't. I looked down at the report again. Exposure mapping, merger, vulnerability, discrete monitoring, all those polished corporate phrases hiding raw panic underneath. Richard Whitcomb knows who you are now. Naomi continued, at least partially, yes. And trust me, men like that do not enjoy surprises. Neither do forensic accountants. At 8:16 p.m., another email arrived from Daniel. Short this time, one sentence. Whitcomb Holdings just attempted emergency legal suppression on internal review dissemination. I stared at it. Then another message arrived. 30 seconds later. Too late. Alicia already copied everything Naomi read over my shoulder. Oh, she said softly. That wasn't fear in her voice. That was recognition. The kind attorneys get when they realize somebody across the table just made a very expensive mistake. I sat down slowly again. You know what this means? Naomi asked. Yes, they are scared. I nodded once. Because emergency suppression requests only happen when somebody believes a document may become dangerous later, which meant somewhere inside those reports was something Richard Whitcomb absolutely did not want preserved by something larger than a wedding, larger than Claire. And suddenly every instinct I had spent 30 years sharpening woke up all at once. Patterns, timing, containment behavior, financial aggression disguised as family concern. It all fit together too neatly, like a watch assembled by somebody obsessive and afraid. I looked at Naomi. Call Alicia. Naomi's eyebrows lifted slightly. You sure? Yes. You think it's that serious? I picked up the Whitcomb report and tapped one paragraph near the bottom of page 11. Naomi leaned closer, then her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. You saw it too, she said quietly. Yes, buried beneath the acquisition language sat a reference to accelerated shoreline rezoning approvals dated 6 weeks earlier. Possible approvals, the kind that only happen when somebody pressures the process illegally or manipulates environmental findings before public review. North Shore Environmental Review, the organization partly tied to Mara's Conservation Trust, existed specifically to prevent that exact thing, which meant Richard Whitcomb had not merely investigated me, which meant he may have accidentally investigated the one man capable of unraveling his entire harbor deal. Naomi picked up her phone immediately. Russell, yeah, you understand this could become federal. I stared at the snow falling beyond the office window, slow, steady, cold enough to preserve footprints. And I said, the truest thing I'd said all night, I think it already is. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. Then 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. At 8:31 p.m., my phone buzzed one final time. Not Claire, not Daniel, Richard Whitcomb himself. The message contained only 7 words. We need to discuss this privately to promote her movie. We need to discuss this privately tomorrow morning. No greeting, no explanation, just pressure wrapped in politeness. I read it twice. Then I turned my phone face down beside Mara's photograph and said very quietly, no, we really don't. I woke up at 4:11 a.m. without an alarm. That happens when something old inside you recognizes danger before the rest of your body catches up. The house was cold, not freezing, just that northern Minnesota pre-dawn chill where the floorboards feel slightly unfriendly. I stood in the kitchen wearing gray socks and an Old Navy sweatshirt Mara stole from me in 1998 and technically never returned. The coffee maker clicked on at 4:16. Outside, snow rested over Duluth like folded paper. I checked my phone once. 3 missed calls from Richard Whitcomb between 11:42 p.m. and 12:08 a.m. 1 voicemail. I deleted it without listening. That probably sounds dramatic. It wasn't. I simply had no interest in hearing a wealthy man rehearse control at midnight. At 5:02 a.m., Naomi texted. Alicia confirmed unauthorized rezoning acceleration patterns. Also confirmed Whitcomb legal team contacted Lakebridge twice overnight, aggressively. 2 minutes later, and before you ask, yes, aggressively is lawyer code for panicking in expensive shoes. I almost smiled almost. By 6:10, I was back at the shop. The radiator clanked awake. The old walnut clock muttered tiredly from the wall. I unlocked the front door, turned on the bench lamps, and laid out tools. Beside the Omega Seamaster, I still hadn't finished. Measure twice, cut once. That was my father's rule. Carpenter from Billings, Montana. Hands like sandpaper and exactly 4 opinions about life. Don't borrow money. Buy good boots. Silence is useful. Measure twice. Cut once. Turns out the old man understood people better than lumber. At 7:03 a.m., Naomi arrived carrying coffee and a legal pad thick enough to stop bullets. You slept, she asked. Some, that's concerning. You're cheerful. I become emotionally energized when rich men start making procedural mistakes. She set the coffee down and immediately began pacing. Alicia pulled archived municipal filings at 2:14 this morning. She said, 3 shoreline variance approvals connected to Whitcomb Holdings were fast-tracked through environmental review without standard delay periods. That alone isn't enough. No, Naomi agreed. But the timing overlapped suspiciously with shell donations routed through 2 development nonprofits. I nodded slowly. Classic laundering camouflage, not direct bribery. Men like Whitcomb rarely touched anything directly. Too smart for that, too practiced. By instead, you create layers, committees, foundations, community improvement grants. Beautiful the way certain storms are beautiful. Federal interest, I asked. Potentially proof, not yet. I sipped coffee carefully. Too hot. Naomi watched me over the rim of her cup. You're calm. I'm thinking. You're hunting. That wasn't entirely wrong. Here's the thing about forensic accounting. Once you've spent enough years tracing deception, patterns stop looking abstract. They become physical. You can almost smell panic in spreadsheets, see arrogance in timing gaps, and Richard Whitcomb had become sloppy overnight. That interested me enormously. At 7:41 a.m., the bell over the shop door rang. Not Richard, Claire. She looked terrible, not physically harmed, just terrible, not physically harmed, just emotionally overclocked. Hair tied back too quickly. Same camel coat as Thursday. No makeup this time. She shut the door behind her and stood there breathing cold air into the room like she'd run the last block I left. She said Naomi and I exchanged one quick glance. When? I asked. About 20 minutes ago. You stayed there overnight. I didn't know where else to go. That landed quietly. I walked around the counter and pulled out the chair beside the workbench. Sit down. She sat immediately, shoulders tight. Naomi handed her coffee without a word. Claire took it with both hands. That's how you can tell when somebody's frightened. They stop using one hand for things. I need you to tell me exactly what happened after we hung up, I said. She nodded once. Richard started asking questions about North Shore Environmental Review in front of everyone meaning Evan, his mother, 2 business associates, some attorney named Carl Benson. Naomi muttered, of course Carl was there. Human migraine. Claire continued. Richard kept pretending it was casual, but he already knew things. He knew your full legal name. He knew about Minneapolis. He knew you'd retained partial ownership interests. After retirement, he moved too fast, Naomi said quietly. Yes, I agreed. Claire looked between us. Why does that matter? Because, I said, men protecting secrets usually move slowly. She swallowed. What secret? I sat down across from her. The harbor acquisition may involve manipulated environmental approvals. Her face went blank. Then illegal Potentially, oh my God, potentially, I repeated. Claire stared at the floor for a long moment. Then she whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. He knew before dinner who? Evan dashed by who? Evan. Naomi stopped moving entirely. I kept my voice even. Tell me, Claire rubbed her forehead. After everyone started drinking, Richard and Carl went into another room with Evan. I overheard part of it when I went looking for the bathroom. What part? She closed her eyes, trying to replay it. Richard said, I told you her father was a complication. The shop suddenly felt smaller. Claire continued slowly. Then Evan said, how was I supposed to know he still had review access? Naomi sat down very carefully. I remained still, very still. And then I asked, Richard said if the merger stalled now, it would cost them 8 figures minimum. There it was. Not family, not dignity, money, always money eventually. Claire looked up at me, eyes wet now, but controlled. Dad, was any of this relationship real? That question hurt more than the rest combined, because underneath the business, the investigations, the medications, sat one terrified daughter trying to determine whether she had actually been loved. I chose my next words carefully. Yes, I said, you don't know that. I know people. That's not an answer. No, I admitted. It's the best one I have. She laughed once through her nose, bitter, small. You know what the worst part is? She asked, what? I defended them. Nobody answered, because what could we say to that? Naomi finally spoke softly. Claire, intelligent people rationalize bad situations all the time, especially when love is involved. Claire looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. He asked me why you still drove the Ranger, she murmured. I blinked once. What, Evan, 3 months ago? She gave a humorless little laugh. He said, successful people usually signal success differently. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, like she was praying for patience. And what did you say? I asked. Claire looked embarrassed. I said you were old-fashioned, not cruel, not poor, not weak. Just old-fashioned. Funny how children soften insults when translating them to themselves. I nodded slowly. I said, do you love him? Her eyes filled immediately. Yes, that complicated things. I mean that literally. Because revenge stories sound cleaner before real emotions arrive. Once love enters the room, even damaged love, everything becomes heavier, more expensive. You know what I think? Naomi said carefully. Neither of us answered. I think Richard involved his son in business long before he involved him in morality. Claire stared at her. Naomi shrugged slightly. Some fathers teach ethics, others teach leverage. Silence again. Then the bell over the front door rang. All 3 of us looked up. Richard Whitcomb entered my shop wearing a charcoal wool coat worth more than my first car. Tall man, early 60s, silver hair arranged with deliberate carelessness, the kind of face expensive barbers build slowly over time. And behind him stood Carl Benson. Of course, Carl had the expression all corporate attorneys eventually develop, permanently inconvenienced by humanity. Richard removed leather gloves 1 finger at a time, measured, controlled, but his jaw was grinding slightly on the left side. There it was. Fear. Claire, he said evenly. She stood immediately. I left. Yes, he replied. I noticed. I stepped forward before either of them could continue. You don't come into my shop and speak to my daughter like she's 12. Richard looked at me for the first time fully, not dismissively now. Carefully, Mr. Marlowe, he said. Russell, his voice was smooth enough to skate on. Carl closed the front door behind them. Naomi saw it too. Her posture changed instantly. Tiny adjustment, lawyer posture, predator posture. Richard clasped his hands loosely in front of him. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Naomi laughed out loud, not politely either. Good, she said. I was worried you would start with honesty and ruin the mood. Carl's eyes narrowed. And you are not made. Rice recognition flickered immediately across his face. That interested me. Richard stayed focused on me. I think we should speak privately No. His eyebrows lifted slightly. No. He repeated, no. I said calmly, you involved my daughter. You involved investigators. You involved legal suppression requests. At midnight, we're past private. Carl spoke for the first time. Careful, I turned toward him slowly. I spent 28 years tracing hidden money through men exactly like you, I said quietly. Do not mistake my manners for uncertainty. Nobody moved. Silence had weight to it. Richard recovered first. Russell, he said smoothly, whatever assumptions you formed, I assure you, the situation is more nuanced than you realize. Nuanced than you realize. Nuanced, Naomi repeated. That's rich people language for, please don't subpoena that P or two. Carl took one sharp step forward. Naomi didn't even look at him. I bill by the hour, sweetheart, she said. Try me. I almost smiled. Almost. Richard's attention shifted briefly to Claire. That was his mistake. Because the second he looked at her like an asset instead of a person, I understood the entire structure, not just the business, the family, everything. And trust me, once you see the structure underneath someone, you cannot unsee it. Richard inhaled slowly. Then he said the one thing he absolutely should not have said. You need to understand how much money is at stake here. The room went still. Even Carl looked annoyed. Claire's face changed first, not dramatic, just heartbreak arriving in real time. Beautiful the way collapsing buildings are beautiful from very far away. I stepped toward Richard once, quietly. I don't care, I said. He blinked. I continued. You thought this was about leverage. It isn't. I pointed toward Claire without looking away from him. You made my daughter feel ashamed of where she came from so you could protect a land deal. Richard opened his mouth. I held up one hand, just one, and he stopped talking. I know exactly what you've been doing, I said softly. The accelerated approvals, the shell donations, the containment reviews. I tilted my head slightly. And now Alicia Moreno has copies of everything. For the first time since entering the shop, Richard Whitcomb lost control of his face just for a second, but that second told me everything. Carl spoke immediately. You have no proof of misconduct? No, I agreed. Not yet. Richard's jaw tightened again. Then Claire whispered something into the silence that sounded small enough to break. You used me? Richard looked at her sharply. Claire, no, she said. You did. Evan's mother once probably taught her how to sit at formal dinners, how to fold napkins correctly, which fork mattered, but heartbreak strips etiquette right out of people. You knew about my father before I did, she continued. You investigated him before you even knew him. Richard softened his voice instantly. Claire, this acquisition affects thousands of jobs. There it is, Naomi muttered. Claire stared at him. And in that moment, I watched my daughter finally understand the difference between being welcomed and being positioned. Richard tried once more. None of this changes how Evan feels about you. I spoke before Claire could answer. That may be true, I said quietly, but it absolutely changes how she should feel about all of you. Nobody said anything after that. Carl looked toward Richard. Richard looked at Claire. Claire looked at the floor, and I looked at the old scratched Hamilton on my wrist, while the second hand kept moving forward with calm, mechanical certainty. Measure twice, cut once. Finally, Richard exhaled. What do you want? He asked. That question always comes eventually. I looked him directly in the eyes. And I said the last thing he expected, nothing. The confusion on his face was almost worth the week. Almost. You could destroy this merger, Carl said carefully. Maybe you could trigger investigations. Possibly. Richard studied me now with something close to genuine uncertainty, because men like him understand transactions. Mercy confuses them. I picked up a folded envelope from my desk and handed it to Naomi. She passed it to Richard. He opened it slowly. Inside sat copies of the environmental irregularities we'd identified overnight, not submitted, not leaked, just documented. Richard read the first page and the second. movie by his face went pale in stages like winter moving across water. You had this prepared, Carl said quietly. Yes, when I looked at about 45 minutes after your client decided to investigate my life, nobody spoke. Then I said very softly, you should have left my daughter out of it. Richard Whitcomb stood in my shop holding those papers for a very long time, not reading anymore, just holding them. There's a particular silence that settles over people when they realize control has left the room without telling them. I'd seen it in courtrooms, mediation offices, conference calls at 2 a.m. with executives who suddenly understood their offshore accounts were no longer offshore enough. That silence had found Richard now. Outside, snow slid softly off the awning above the front window. Inside, nobody moved. Finally, Carl Benson cleared his throat. What exactly is your intention here? I answered honestly. I haven't decided yet. Carl hated that answer. Immediately, you could see it in the way his jaw tightened. Lawyers like fixed terrain, predictable leverage, clean pressure points, uncertainty terrifies them. Richard folded the papers carefully back into the envelope too carefully. Russell, he said, voice controlled. Again, if mistakes were made during environmental review procedures, they can be corrected privately. Naomi laughed under her breath. Private, she repeated. There's that word again. Richard ignored her. I'm asking for reason here. No, I said quietly. You're asking for containment. That landed. Claire sat beside the workbench staring at her untouched coffee cup. She looked exhausted now, like the last 12 hours had aged her sideways, and maybe they had. There's no clean way to discover love came bundled with due diligence paperwork. Richard turned toward her carefully, so softer tone now. Claire, Evan truly cares about you. She looked up slowly. I think he does, she said. Interesting answer. Not yes, not no. Truth lives in narrow spaces sometimes. Richard took one measured step closer to her. And don't let business complications distort that. Business complications. I watched Claire's face when he said it. That was the moment something finally broke, not loudly, quietly, like ice giving way beneath too much weight. You know what hurts? She asked him softly. Richard stopped moving. You never once asked if this would hurt me. Nobody breathed for a second. Then she stood up. I spent 8 months trying to become someone your family would approve of. She laughed once through her nose. Different clothes, different restaurants, different words. She looked down briefly. I stopped talking about mom because your wife said grief makes people socially heavy. Naomi closed her eyes. Richard's face shifted, tiny crack in the marble. Claire kept going. I defended all of you to my father. Claire kept going. Do you understand that? I defended you. Claire, Richard began. No, one word. Small, steady, done. I had not heard that tone from her since she was 16 and told a school principal she would rather fail a semester than apologize for something she didn't do. I remember driving her home afterward in the Ranger. She sat silent the entire ride. And halfway down Mezabah Avenue, she said, some adults think calm means they're right. Mara laughed so hard. She cried. Richard tried again. You're emotional right now. Bad sentence. Very bad sentence. Claire stared at him like she no longer recognized the species. Of course I am emotional, she said quietly. You investigated my father before meeting him properly. Richard glanced at me. That was another mistake, because the second he looked away from her pain toward strategy, she saw it too. And trust me, once daughters notice that kind of thing, fathers lose them in inches. Carl stepped forward slightly. We're drifting into unnecessary hostility. No, Naomi said. You just finally lost narrative control. Carl ignored her. He looked at me instead. Russell, if these documents become public before context is established, there will be collateral damage. There already is, I replied. His eyes flicked briefly toward Claire. Exactly, I noticed Richard studying me differently now, less arrogance, more calculation. He was trying to understand why I wasn't escalating faster, because from his perspective, I had him cornered, potential regulatory violations, financial exposure, documented suppression attempts, enough smoke to interest federal investigators for months. So why wasn't I burning everything down? Simple answer, because Claire still loved Evan. Complicated answer, because Claire still loved Evan. Complicated answer, because destruction is easy, control is harder. Mara used to say, anger feels productive because it moves fast. Wisdom usually arrives carrying paperwork and asking annoying questions. I missed her terribly in that moment. Richard straightened slightly. What happens next? I looked at the Omega Seamaster sitting unfinished on my bench, tiny gears exposed beneath the lamp. One damaged spring can ruin an entire movement if you rush the repair. Next, I said calmly, you withdraw every investigative request related to me or my daughter. Richard nodded once immediately. You stop all contact with Lakebridge Risk. Another nod. By you disclose all environmental review communications connected to the harbor acquisition to independent counsel. This time hesitation. There it was. Carl stepped in instantly. That's not reasonable. It's necessary. It's invasive. It's invasive. It's called transparency. Richard looked between us. Then quietly, and if we refuse, I met his eyes. Then people with badges eventually become involved. Nobody spoke after that. The old walnut clock ticked softly on the wall. Carl rubbed his forehead once. Richard, I know. No, Carl said quietly. I don't think you do. Interesting, very interesting, because that tome wasn't legal anymore. That was survival. Richard saw it too. For the first time since entering my shop, he looked tired, not weak, just tired, like a man who had spent too many years believing control and intelligence were identical things. He looked at Claire again, and this time finally I think he saw a person instead of a variable. I never intended to hurt you, he said. Claire's expression softened slightly, painfully slightly. That doesn't really help. She replied, no shouting, no dramatic collapse, just truth sitting quietly between people. Those are the moments that actually matter. Richard nodded once slowly. Then he turned to me. What about Evan? There was the real question. Not the merger, not the money. The son, I considered that carefully because Evan Whitcomb was guilty of weakness, cowardice, and privilege, but I wasn't yet convinced he was cruel. There's a difference, an important one. He calls her himself. I sent no lawyers, no family scripts, no explanations prepared by committee. Richard frowned slightly. That's all. Carl looked genuinely confused. Again, men like that understand warfare better than restraint. Richard slipped the envelope under his arm. Then, after a long silence, he said something I did not expect. You remind me of my father. Naomi looked visibly alarmed by that sentence. I almost smiled. Was he also disappointing to rich people? I asked. To my surprise, Richard laughed softly. Just once, no, he admitted he fixed radios in Milwaukee. Well, there it was, the whole structure underneath him suddenly visible for half a second. A man who escaped his origins so aggressively he began punishing other people for reminding him of them. Funny how often that happens. Richard looked around the shop, the old wood counters, watch parts, dusty lamps, Mara's photograph beside the register. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, I think somewhere along the line, I forgot what normal looked like. Naomi muttered, that's the closest thing to self-awareness we're getting today. I will not be taking questions about that. Richard extended one hand toward me, not dominance, not performance, just tired respect. I looked at it for a second before shaking it once. Firm, brief, done. Then he and Carl left. The bell over the door rang softly behind them. Nobody spoke for a while afterward. Claire sat back down slowly, like her knees no longer trusted her completely. Now, oh yeah, got Mally. Well, that was deeply unhealth out. That finally got a laugh out of Claire, small, exhausted, real. I sat beside her quietly. You okay? I asked. No. Fair. She leaned her elbows on her knees and stared at the floor. I keep replaying everything she admitted, every conversation, every dinner, every little comment. She shook her head. I thought they were teaching me sophistication. I said nothing because sometimes people need silence more than advice. After a minute, she whispered, did I really act ashamed of you? Now that was dangerous territory. Parents lie at moments like that, usually from kindness. I loved my daughter too much to do that. Yes, I said gently. Her eyes closed immediately. But I continued, you were also trying very hard to belong somewhere. She nodded without looking up. I just wanted things to feel secure. I know. That's pathetic. No, I said quietly. Human, Naomi sat across from us eating the last dumpling directly out of the carton. Trauma makes people weird around wealth, she announced. Some chase it, some resent it. Some start buying terrible wine and calling it networking. Claire laughed despite herself. That feels oddly specific. Naomi pointed a chopstick at her, had a brief vineyard phase in 2009. We don't discuss it. That helped. A little humor creates breathing room inside ugly days. At 11:26 a.m., Claire's phone rang. Evan, she stared at the screen for a long time, then looked at me. I shrugged slightly. Your decision, she answered. Hi. Pause. Her face changed almost immediately. Not anger, relief, interesting. I know, she said softly. I know. Another pause. Then, no, I'm at my dad's shop. Longer pause. Naomi and I pretended not to listen, which of course meant we listened professionally. Claire finally sighed. No, Evan, I don't think you understood what your family was doing either. I looked down at my Hamilton watch again, ticking steadily. Mara always loved mechanical watches because they could be repaired. Phones just die, she used to say. Watches survive arguments. Maybe she was right. Claire stood and walked toward the front window while talking quietly. Naomi leaned toward me. You think the kid's salvageable? Maybe. That hopeful, huh? I've seen worse men become decent husbands. You've also seen worse men become senators. That too. Now we snorted coffee into the lid. 20 minutes later, Claire returned, eyes red, but calmer. He didn't know about the investigation scope, she said quietly. You believe him? Naomi asked. Yes, I studied her face carefully. And Naomi asked. Yes, I studied her face carefully. And he knew his father was checking your background, she swallowed. But he thought it was social. Prow, reputation, not this. That tracked. Cowardice is common. Conspiracy requires effort. Claire sat beside the workbench. Again, he said he's leaving the family company. Naomi blinked. Well, damn. Claire rubbed her forehead. Richard apparently told him this morning that if he married me now, every business decision would become compromised. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was again, everything reduced to leverage. He chose you, I asked. Claire looked confused by the question. Yes, good. Tears finally spilled then. Quiet ones, not dramatic, just grief leaving the body slowly. I handed her a shop rag because fathers are not always elegant in emotional emergencies. She laughed through tears immediately. Seriously, it's clean. That is deeply on brand for you. Thank you. She wiped her eyes with a cloth originally intended for polishing watch crystals. Life gets strange sometimes. Around noon, Naomi left to begin formal preservation requests through independent counsel before Whitcomb lawyers could start shredding narratives into manageable pieces. Before leaving, she squeezed my shoulder once. You did good, she said quietly. I watched her walk out into the snow-carrying legal folders like a woman marching toward battle. Claire stayed another hour. We didn't solve everything that's important. She apologized. I accepted it. Neither of us pretended trust repairs itself overnight. Some days I wonder if I did the right thing. Most days I know I did. That's enough. Before leaving, Claire stopped near the front door. Dad, yeah. She glanced outside toward the old green Ranger parked beneath fresh snow. I think I liked the truck more before, she admitted. I almost smiled, Well, I said, the window still sticks in cold weather. That feels comforting somehow. Low standards run in the family. She laughed again. Then she walked over and hugged me hard enough to remind me she was still the little girl from the linen closet somewhere underneath all this. After she left, the shop became quiet again, just ticking clocks, radiator clicks, snow drifting past the windows. I stood there alone for a while, wearing Mara's old scratch-marked Hamilton on my wrist. Then I pulled the unfinished Omega closer beneath the lamp and turned on the magnifier. Measure twice, cut once. Funny thing is, watches survive because somebody takes the time to open them carefully instead of smashing them apart looking for answers. Families aren't all that different. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere. A little after 1 p.m., my phone buzzed one final time. A text from Claire. Love you, Dad, and I'm sorry I forgot where I came from. I looked at the message for a long moment. Then I set the phone beside Mara's photograph, adjusted the tiny spring beneath the Omega balance wheel, and quietly said to the empty shop, "She's finding her way back